when the stage lights dimmed and martini glasses began to overflow in the casinos of Las Vegas. That was when Dean Martin, the king of cool, finally started telling the truest stories. This man looked at Hollywood with the eyes of a rogue who understood the brutal rules of the game. In this place of vanity, there is no such thing as a free lunch, and beauty is the only currency that never depreciates. There was the sex bomb passed around by the elite like a toy on a banquet table, a genius forced to play dumb to serve as dessert for politicians and mafia bosses. Even Hollywood's powerful queen once had to sell herself in cheap stag films and later spent a fortune to burn that sordid past. Cast aside the romantic reels, pour yourself a stiff drink, and sit down. Dean Martin will take you through 5 chapters of a brutal dossier, where the line between a silver screen star and a high-class call girl is more fragile than ever. Chapter 1. Marilyn Monroe, the most expensive item on the Old Wolf's banquet table. If anyone was qualified to sit down, take a drag on a cigarette, and speak the naked truth about Hollywood, it had to be Dean Martin. He was the king of cool. A core member of the illustrious Rat Pack, a man who stood at the pinnacle of fame in both Hollywood and Las Vegas. He had seen it all: money, power, and the flesh transactions disguised as art. In his final days, when the limelight had receded, Dean Martin held a drink in his hand and mentioned the first name on the list of goddesses with dark pasts. That name silenced the world with admiration, but for Dean, it evoked sadness for a girl who had to sell herself bit by bit to survive. That was Marilyn Monroe. To understand this story, you must forget the image of the hot blonde standing over the subway grate with her white dress flying up. Rewind to the late 40s, when Marilyn was just Norma Jean Baker, a poor, hungry brunette desperately looking for a foothold. Dean Martin knew the rules of the game of Hollywood back then better than anyone. It was the era of powerful studio moguls who reigned like kings, and for young girls with no money and no connections like Norma Jean, the door to fame had only one key: the bedroom door. Before becoming a global sex symbol, Marilyn Monroe had to endure long nights of humiliation that film history rarely dares to mention. Dean had witnessed, or heard from close friends in the circle like Frank Sinatra or mafia bosses, how Marilyn was passed around at private parties. There is a cruel truth Dean Martin did not hesitate to expose. In reality, Marilyn operated as a high-class call girl to exchange for her first small roles. Remember 1949, when Marilyn accepted to shoot the famous nude photos on red velvet for a meager fee of just $50. At that time, she didn't do it for art. She did it because she owed rent and needed money for food. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. At lavish parties in the mansions of film producers, Marilyn frequently appeared not as a guest, but as dessert. Dean Martin recalled the look in her eyes during those nights. She smiled, that famous, radiant smile. But her eyes were soulless and fearful. She knew her mission clearly. If she wanted a line in the upcoming movie, she had to please the man sitting at the head of that table. Studio moguls of that time had a term called the casting couch. But in Marilyn's case, it wasn't just a couch, it was midnight phone calls, demanding she come to read scripts in private hotel rooms where there were no scripts, only powerful men waiting. Dean Martin once bitterly admitted that Marilyn's innocence on screen was her greatest acting performance, because in real life, she had been forced to grow up too soon in a brutal meat market. She understood that beauty was the only capital she had. There is a chilling story whispered by insiders in Vegas. It was that Marilyn was once invited to attend parties of the underworld friends of the Rat Pack. There, she wasn't a movie star. She was a beautiful gift presented to please the Godfathers. Dean Martin saw her resignation. She didn't resist, because she knew resistance meant her career would end immediately. and she would return to being a factory worker with a starvation wage. What tormented Dean Martin the most wasn't what Marilyn did, but how the world treated her. Hollywood sold us to her in the literal sense. They thoroughly exploited her sex appeal, turning her into a sex symbol, while they were the ones who pushed her onto the path of using her body for trade from the very beginning. Marilyn Monroe wasn't a bad girl in the way people judged. In Dean Martin's eyes, she was a victim of a system operating on lust. She sold herself, yes, but to buy back a dream. She accepted being a toy for those with money in exchange for public attention. When Dean Martin raised his glass to remember her, he didn't see a magnificent Marilyn on the cover of Playboy. He saw Norma Jean, a small girl trembling as she stepped out of some tycoon's bedroom at dawn, clutching a check or a verbal promise of a role, with eyes swollen from humiliation but still trying to apply lipstick heavily to cover the truth. Marilyn Monroe tops this list not to be shamed. She stands here as the most heartbreaking proof of Dean's statement, in Hollywood, everything has a price, and sometimes the price to pay is your very soul. Chapter 2. Joan Crawford, the stripper, and the $100,000 stag film. Dean Martin took a drag of his cigarette, exhaling smoke into the hazy air. He smiled, that signature half-smile of someone who knew life too well. If Marilyn Monroe was a lamb lost among wolves and torn apart, the second woman on this list was a true she-wolf. She walked into the tiger's den herself, accepting to sell her soul to the devil in exchange for the crown. That person was Joan Crawford. The general audience only knew Joan Crawford as a symbol of elegance and nobility, who always appeared in magnificent evening gowns with the demeanor of a queen. But Dean Martin, a man with close ties to both artists and the underworld, knew a very different Joan Crawford. A Joan Crawford of the days without a name, without fame, possessing only hunger and fierce survival instincts. Before the name Joan Crawford blazed on neon signs, her name was Lucille Lazour, and Lucille wasn't a lady of high society. She was a dancer at seedy nightclubs in Chicago and Detroit. Dean Martin knew those kinds of nightclubs well. They weren't places for art. They were disguised meat markets. There, young girls were called taxi dancers. Male customers bought tickets to dance with them, but everyone understood that if they paid more, they could buy more than a dance. The line between a dancer and a prostitute in those places was as thin as smoke. But Joan Crawford's darkest secret didn't stop at cheap dances for entertainment. Dean Martin lowered his voice, as if telling a state secret. In Hollywood's upper crust, there was a horrifying rumor that MGM had to spend a fortune to bury. It was the story of the Black Reel. Rumor had it that in the most desperate days of her youth, before Lucille Lazour became Joan Crawford, she accepted a role in a pornographic film, then called a stag film, to earn money for food. The film was titled Velvet. When Joan began to get famous and became a cash cow for mogul Louis B. Mayer of MGM, this dark past suddenly returned to haunt her. An anonymous person blackmailed the studio, threatening to release that naked reel to the public. In the 30s, if such a film were exposed, Joan's career would end immediately, and the noble image the studio worked hard to build would collapse. Dean Martin recounted that Hollywood's cleanup machine had to intervene. Eddie Mannix, MGM's notorious fixer, who specialized in solving stars' troubles with money and fists, was dispatched. The price to buy back the original negative and silence those holding it was said to be up to $100,000, a huge sum at that time. The transaction took place in secret, quickly and ruthlessly, true to mafia style. The film was burned, and Joan Crawford's past as a working girl was completely whitewashed. She transformed, from a dancer ready to do anything for money to a dignified, strict lady, even praised as a standard of morality. But Dean Martin saw the irony in it. He realized that this very sordid past created Joan's eccentric personality later. Why was she obsessed with cleanliness to a pathological degree, as Kirk Douglas once complained? Why did she frantically clean the house and wrap everything in plastic? Dean took a sip of wine and gave a bitter answer because she was trying to scrub herself clean. Joan Crawford scrubbed the floor until her hands bled because she couldn't scrub away the memories of dirty male hands that touched her in those dark nightclubs of the past. She built an icy wall, controlling everything around her because she feared that if she let her guard down for a second, the real person, the cheap dancer Lucille LeSueur, would reappear. In Dean Martin's eyes, Joan Crawford wasn't a bad person. She was a warrior. She accepted selling her body in the dark to buy a ticket into the light. She understood the rules of this brutal game better than anyone. There is no free lunch. Looking at Joan Crawford striding proudly on the Oscar red carpet, Dean Martin didn't see glamour. He saw a woman who had to pay with the self-esteem of her youth. She traded with the devil, and she won. But that victory left a permanent scar on her soul, turning her into a cold wax statue, always living in fear that one day that black reel would resurrect. That is why Joan Crawford is on this list. Not because she was promiscuous, but because she is the most vivid proof that Hollywood can turn a call girl into a queen, as long as she brings enough profit to the moguls. Chapter 3. Lana Turner, the bedside trophy of mafia bosses. Dean Martin tapped his fingers lightly on the oak table, his gaze distant toward the flashing neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip. If there was one thing Dean understood better than movie scripts or musical notes, it was the underworld mafia. As a member of the Rat Pack, he and Frank Sinatra frequently dined, drank, and shook hands with America's most powerful godfathers. He knew their rules: ruthless, fair, and treating women like jewelry. And in Dean Martin's eyes, no star ventured into that dark world as deeply as Lana Turner. Audiences loved Lana for her image as the innocent, sweet sweater girl. But Dean Martin laughed bitterly thinking about it. He knew the real Lana. She wasn't an innocent girl. She was a woman addicted to thrills, someone willing to turn herself into a high-class toy for society's most dangerous men in exchange for protection and virtual power. Dean Martin placed Lana Turner on this list not because she prostituted herself for money like nameless starlets. She sold herself in a classier and much more dangerous way. She sold her fame to add prestige to criminals. Look at her most scandalous affair with Johnny Stompanato. Johnny wasn't an actor, nor a director. He was a gangster, a bodyguard and hitman under the notorious boss Mickey Cohen. He was the kind of person Dean Martin often saw standing in the dark corners of casinos, hand always resting near the hip of his jacket where a pistol was hidden. Why would a top Hollywood superstar like Lana Turner fall into the arms of such a pimp? Dean Martin had the answer. It was a fair love contract. Johnny Stompanato needed Lana Turner. For a gangster, possessing the most desired woman in America in bed was a glorious achievement. He treated her like the latest Cadillac, something to show off to his underlings, to prove his class. He displayed her, dragged her to nightclubs, forced her to wear expensive jewelry he bought with dirty money. Conversely, what did Lana Turner get from this contract? She got violent submission. She liked how Johnny intimidated those who displeased her. She liked the feeling of walking beside a wild beast whom everyone had to respect. But the price she paid was her body and self-esteem. Dean Martin witnessed heartbreaking scenes backstage at performances. Johnny Stompanato didn't treat Lana like a queen. He treated her like a prostitute under private ownership. He beat her, controlled her, threatened to slash her beautiful money-making face if she dared to look at another man. Lana Turner, the powerful woman on screen, in real life resigned herself to being a sex slave for a petty criminal. She used her money to support him, pay for hotels, buy him nice clothes. just in exchange for nights of wild intimacy and a false sense of security. The climax of this tragedy was the shocking murder case in 1958. It was that fateful night when Lana's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, unable to bear seeing her mother beaten by Johnny, used a kitchen knife to stab the gangster lover to death right in the bedroom. That case exposed all the sordid truth Lana tried to hide. The whole world was shocked to realize their goddess was actually living in a mud puddle with the dregs of society. In Dean Martin's eyes, Lana Turner made the worst transaction. She not only sold her body cheap, but also sold her family's safety. She let the underworld invade the bedroom, turning the most private place into a den of crime. Dean Martin once told friends in a drunken stupor, "Lana thinks she's controlling the beast, but actually, she's just a tasty piece of bait." To the mafia, Lana Turner was never a lover. She was a mob mall slang for women of gangsters, an expensive decoration, discarded when bored with, or worse, used to launder money and create a cover. Lana traded her halo for bruises and a tragedy that haunted her daughter for life. Dean Martin lit a new cigarette, shaking his head in weariness. He knew well the end of women involved in his world. Lana Turner might not have stood on street corners, might not have taken small change, but she let the most ruthless men value her. And in that world reeking of gunpowder and dirty money, the value of a woman, even a movie star, wasn't much higher than a hand of cards. Chapter 4. Jane Mansfield, Dessert at Politicians' Banquets. Dean Martin swirled the martini in his hand, the ice clinking against the glass, sounding like a bell signaling the end of a play. He squinted, remembering a brilliant, loud, and most fleshy beauty he ever met in Las Vegas casinos. People often called her a faulty copy of Marilyn Monroe, but Dean knew well, she wasn't a copy. She was a tragedy of miscalculation. That was Jane Mansfield. If Marilyn Monroe sold innocence and vulnerability, Lana Turner sold the danger of the underworld. Jane Mansfield sold something much more naked, carnal presence. Dean Martin put Jane on this list for a heartbreaking reason. She was the embodiment of Hollywood's most sophisticated form of high-class prostitution. She didn't stand on the street. She didn't haggle in cheap hotels. She turned herself into a living gift, a kind of accompanying service at lavish parties of politicians and oil tycoons. There was a fact that always made Dean Martin feel tormented when thinking about Jane. That was her possessing an IQ of 163 genius level, comparable to Einstein. She spoke 5 foreign languages fluently, played the violin skillfully, and was a devoted mother. But Jane, with that sharp intelligence, realized a brutal rule of contemporary society. Men didn't want to go to bed with a bespectacled female professor. They wanted to go to bed with a big, busted, dumb blonde. And so, Jane Mansfield began selling the role of her life, the role of a promiscuous, revealing girl ready to do anything for attention. Dean Martin witnessed Jane appearing at parties in Las Vegas and Washington. She didn't come there to discuss art or politics. She came there as dessert for powerful gentlemen. Her mission was very clear: wear the tightest dresses possible, laugh as loud as possible, and occasionally, accidentally, reveal sensitive body parts in front of guests. It was a form of underground transaction. Tycoons paid money or privileges, fame for Jane to appear, heat up the atmosphere, and satisfy their egos. The fact that an aging politician could hold the waist of sex bomb Jane Mansfield, whispering into her platinum hair in front of reporters' lenses, was how they affirmed their masculine power. Jane Mansfield understood clearly she was a commodity. She once said a famous sentence that Dean Martin considered the most bitter confession: if you're going to do something wrong, do it big, so the whole world sees. And she truly did. She turned her life into a series of calculated wardrobe malfunctions. Dean recalled the notorious 1957 party where Jane sat next to legend Sophia Loren. The photo of Sophia glancing at Jane's massive breasts spilling out of her dress became history. Everyone laughed at Jane's ostentation. But Dean didn't laugh. He saw in Jane's eyes a tired calculation. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was serving the crowd's voyeuristic needs in exchange for existence in the tabloids. But the real tragedy lay behind the closed doors after those parties. There were rumors only insiders like Dean Martin dared whisper to each other. That was the ambiguous relationship between Jane Mansfield and America's top figures, including names related to the Kennedy family. She was passed around in the upper class as a symbol of enjoyment. People came to her not seeking love, but to experience the feeling of possessing the most womanly body in America. Jane Mansfield never refused. She threw herself into quick affairs, noisy marriages, and those exchange relationships with the hope that if she gave enough, Hollywood would recognize her as a true star. But Hollywood was an ungrateful lover. When Jane's beauty began to fade and the public got bored with her exposure stunts, she was discarded mercilessly. In her final years, Dean Martin saw Jane having to perform at second-rate nightclubs, even cutting ribbons for small supermarkets to make a living. The genius with IQ 163 now had to wear gaudy bikinis, trying to cling to a bit of glory with ridiculous antics. Her tragic death in a car accident in 1967, when she was only 34, was like a horrifying full stop to a wrong contract. Jane Mansfield sold her intellect for breasts, sold her self-esteem for applause, and in the end, she lost everything. Dean Martin drained his glass, exhaling a puff of white smoke. He put Jane Mansfield in Chapter 4 of this black dossier not with contempt, but with deep compassion. She was a victim of her own intelligence. She thought she could control the game with flesh. But in the end, the flesh consumed her. Chapter 5. Barbara Stanwyck, the thorny rose, blooming from the mud of Prohibition's speakeasies. It was late at night in Las Vegas. Dean Martin drained the last glass of wine, his eyes becoming unusually pensive. He had told of innocent victims like Marilyn, lost souls like Lana. But the final name on this list belonged to a completely different class. That was the woman all of Hollywood had to bow to in respect for her sharpness and steely grit. That was Barbara Stanwyck. But Dean Martin knew steel doesn't occur naturally. It must be forged through red fire and cold water. And for Barbara Stanwyck, fire was the long nights of debauchery in Prohibition-era nightclubs. And cold water was the cold flesh transactions she was forced to accept to escape poverty. Before becoming the powerful Lady Stanwyck in Double Indemnity or The Big Valley. Her name was Ruby Stevens, a girl orphaned at 4, growing up in the poor alleys of Brooklyn. Dean Martin always held a special respect for those who rose from the streets, but he also knew how high the price was. In the 1920s, Ruby Stevens began her career not on the silver screen, but as a dancer in the Ziegfeld Follies and at Texas Guinan's notorious speakeasies. Dean Martin knew those places well. They were dens of gang bosses, bootleggers, and corrupt politicians there. Young, beautiful girls like Ruby weren't just paid to dance. There was a brutal, unwritten rule at New York's hangouts back then that Dean Martin didn't hesitate to expose dancers frequently had to work extra as party girls after performances. They were ornaments for notorious tough guys, rewards for nights of debauchery. Ruby Stevens, with her sharp beauty, expressive eyes, and fiery body, quickly caught the eye of the most powerful men. She wasn't naive like Marilyn Monroe. She knew exactly where she stood. She accepted this game not for vainglory, but for survival. She needed money to eat, to live, and most importantly, to buy a ticket out of this mire. Dean Martin had heard elders recount that Barbara Stanwyck had to go through auditions more brutal than any movie casting. to get her first roles on Broadway and later Hollywood. She had to trade silent service to entertainment moguls. She was the lover in the shadows of those holding the power of life and death, those who could turn a nameless dancer into a star overnight, or sink her to the bottom of society forever. But what made Barbara Stanwyck different from all other women on this list was how she faced it. She didn't let herself become a victim. She turned those pains and humiliations into weapons. Watching Barbara play the manipulative woman in Double Indemnity, Dean Martin shuddered. He realized that cold, calculating look wasn't acting. It was the look of Ruby Stevens from years ago, the girl who had to grit her teeth enduring rough male hands in nightclubs, forging a will to take revenge on life. She learned how to manipulate men before they could manipulate her. She entered Hollywood not as a lamb, but as a wolf that had tasted blood. She used beauty and masterful seduction skills, things she honed during dark years to climb to the peak of fame. She married, divorced, established relationships with chillingly precise calculation. Dean Martin put her on this list because she represents a naked truth. Sometimes, to become a queen, you must accept being a whore first. But Barbara Stanwyck played this hand too excellently. She trampled on her sordid past, washing it away with talent and frantic work, making the world forget her dancer origins. However, at private parties of the elite, when the wine had set in, Dean Martin still saw a fleeting deep sadness in Barbara's eyes. It was the loneliness of a woman never truly loved. Men came to her in the past only for the body, and those who came later only for the fame. She sold her innocence too soon, leaving a callous heart that no longer knew how to flutter. When Dean Martin stood up to leave the bar, he left a closing remark for Barbara Stanwyck's file: "She was the strongest woman I ever knew, but that strength was built with bricks of humiliation. She sold her soul to the devil, but not to be a slave, but to seize his throne." Barbara Stanwyck is the perfect ending to this blacklist. She is proof that Hollywood is not for the weak. It is a bloody battlefield covered in velvet, where only those who dare to trade everything, including their bodies, have a chance to survive and become legends. Dean Martin set the glass down on the table. The story ended, but the bitter aftertaste still lingered in the cigarette smoke. 5 women, 5 illustrious beauty icons, ultimately were just pawns in the hands of powerful moguls. They traded sex for opportunity, traded peace for applause. People call it a fall. But to Dean Martin, it was brutal survival. Hollywood was never a fairy tale. It was a massive business deal where women sometimes had to pay with their very dignity to be allowed to shine. If time could be turned back, who among these 5 stars do you think would dare throw away the glory to exchange for a peaceful life? Is it the fragile Marilyn Monroe or the ambitious Lana Turner? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to continue hearing earth-shattering secrets only the walls of Hollywood know, click follow right now. The story isn't over yet.